Let me start the shear and put the screen on. Share the screen for a second for the Makorot. We're going to be talking about what I call the pleasure principle in Yahadut. The question that I really want to focus on is how much do we put an emphasis on enjoying this world for the sake of enjoying this world? And how much do we look at it as a b'diavad? And this question you can begin from many different points, but I want to start from Matan Torah. This week's that what we're going to actually read on Shavuot, the end of Parshat Mishpatim, the view of the of Madbad Har Sinai machloket between the Rishonim and the Tanaim, even as to whether Perek Chaf Dalet of Sefer Shemot, the end of Parshat Mishpatim, whether that is something which is told at the after the Aseret HaDibrot, is that a retelling from a different angle of Perek Yutet, which we will read on Shavuot morning of Matan Torah. That is the opinion of Rashi. That's the opinion of the bulk of the Tanaim. However, famously the Ramban, this isn't really the topic of this year, but the Ramban, following the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Aglili in the amongst the Tanaim, feels that the Parshiot are given to us in the proper order, the order that they the chronological order as so they appear. And this is an incident immediately after Ma'amad Har Sinai, right before Moshe goes up for the 40 days of on Har Sinai the first time around, which of course will end tragically with the Egel. Either way, it's a description of what happens at the revelation of the Mount. And here, the Torah tells us that in the overall description that there are people who go up the mount, and the Moshe, the Shivim Zkenim, and the Torah tells us a very curious pasuk. Ve'alatzilei b'nei Yisrael lo shalach yado. So the nobility of b'nei Yisrael were not, God did not strike out his hand against them. Vayechazu et ha'elokim vayochlu vayishtu. And they beheld God, and they ate and they drank. And it's a curious pasuk, and there are many different issues that are involved with that. What does it mean that they actually saw God? What does it mean that they that lo shalach et yado? It's implying that what they did was problematic. Those are the parts of the pasuk that I don't want to talk about right now, but I do want to focus on those last two words, vayochlu vayishtu. So they ate and they drank, and the Ramban says the following: "V'tam vayishtu." What did they do when they beheld God, rightly or wrongly? They see the divine apparition. What do? They eat and they drink because it's Yom Tov. We are supposed to be joyous at the time of Kabbalat HaTorah. Ka'asher tziva b'chatvam kol divrei Torah la'avanim v'zavachta shlamim v'achalta sham. So you have this idea, right, that Torah, just highlighted, and you're supposed to eat and drink. If we skip down a couple of lines to the bold, Amar Rebbe Lezer Mikan she'osin mishte legomra shel Torah. The whole makor, this is the bright this isn't the pasuk that's being used. The pasuk with regard to the consecration of the Beit Hamikdash, but nevertheless the Ramban sees a similarity to it. But that Rebbe Lezer teaches us the whole notion of making a siyum comes from here, and that is the idea. Because if you think about it, making a siyum and having a meal at the siyum, sudat mitzvah, is counterintuitive. You are celebrating a religious, spiritual milestone. And why should we eat and drink? Why should we celebrate that with physicality? We should perhaps, instead of celebrating with a meal, we should celebrate with another siyum, learn some more Torah. That's what we should do. Why do we pick eating and drinking? So the Ramban says this goes to exactly what Simchat Torah is all about. It was to incorporate the idea of eating and drinking. However, the um, the Gemara in Brachot gives a different interpretation to the very same pasuk and looks at this pasuk of Vayechazu et Elokim Vayochlu Vayishtu in a specifically spiritual manner. The Gemara says Margala b'pumei derav. There was a literally a pearl in the mouth of Rav, a pearl of wisdom that Rav would say. Ha'olam haba ein bo lo achila velo shtia velo pira v'rivia velo masao matan velo kina velo sina velo tacharut. So the world to come has no physicality whatsoever. Elet tzadikim yoshvin va'atrotehem beroshehem v'nehenim miziv hashchina. So rather, you have a situation with the tzaddikim in the world to come. Again, what the world to come is, when is it, where is it, different discussion. But whatever it is, it's not our world. And here you have the tzaddikim who sit literally with their crowns on their heads and benefit and enjoy the divine sheen. And what is it said? Shneemar vayechazu et Elokim vayochlu vayishtu. The very same pasuk that the Rabban had said is a source for the idea of the siyum, the idea of a physicality in Torah mitzvot. The Gemara says no. The vayochlu vayishtu is metaphoric, to eat, to drink, to consume, to be to consume the spirituality in a world which doesn't have it. And basically, what according to that, what was going on at Har Sinai was that they at that moment were able to overcome their physicality and appreciate the divine for being the divine. And that is the idea of Vayochlu Vayishtu. So you have two very different ways of looking at the very same pasuk and reflecting a question, I believe, of how how important do you view the physical celebration as being part of the Avodah Hashem of Matan Torah? According to the Ramban, what we're saying is that no, the physicality is actually part and parcel of it, but rather the Gemara, on the other hand, is saying no, the physicality really doesn't have any role in spirituality, and if it does have a role, it's going to be a b'diavad role. It's certainly not going to be something which we are going to celebrate. And ideally, we should be in Olam Haba, where that world where Ein Bo Achila V'lo Shtia V'lo Pira V'Rivia. The same idea is found in a Mishnah as well. The Mishnah in Avot, well-known Mishnah, Kain Hi Darka Shel Torah. This is the way of Torah. Hat b'melach tochal, umayim b'mshura tishteh. You should, b'msura, excuse me, tishteh. You should eat with your bread with salt. You should drink your water in a measured way and sleep on the ground. V'chayet sa'ar tichyeh. Live a life of suffering. Uvitorah ata amel, and you and during that, while you are living a life of deprivation, you are having at the very same time, you are devoting yourself entirely to Torah. And if that is what you do, so this is the most happy thing that one can do. The Rambam takes this to the following way. The Rambam says that in understanding in Hilchot Talmud Torah, that what does this mean? Lo yasiach dato lidvarim acherim v'lo yasim al libo sheikneh Torah ma'osher v'hakavod ka'achat. Understand that if you want, and this is the Rambam's terminology of Keter Torah, the Rambam, of course, borrowed it from another Mishnah in Avot, but if you want to be crowned truly, that your persona the Atara B'Roshehem that the Gemara in Brachot had referred to. If you want that crown of Torah on your head, understand that you have to be single-mindedly devoted to Torah, nothing else. Don't think that you can accomplish Torah and at the same time accomplish worldly goals. And he quotes this pasuk of this Mishnah: "Kachi darka shel Torah, pat b'melach tochal u'mayim b'msurat tishteh b'al tishan v'chayei tzahar techya v'Torah ta'amel." This is the idea of Keter Torah. This is the ideal. The ideal is and very, very few people are able to reach this. And this is why the Rambam talks about this in the third parak of Hilchot Talmud Torah, where he's referring specifically to the idea of Keter Shel Torah, the crown of Torah, as opposed to the first parak when he talks about what Talmud Torah is for the overwhelming majority of Jews, there the Rambam says not everyone can reach the Keter Shel Torah. The Rambam says that under those circumstances, the average person is learning only 9 hours a day, and is involved with his livelihood for 3 hours a day, 8 hours of sleep, and 4 hours left for everything else that you need to do. The Rambam expects the average person to be perhaps learning 9 hours a day. But that's not Keter Shel Torah. Keter Shel Torah is somebody who is learning 16 hours a day and is doing nothing else and lives a life of subsistence of just mat b'melech tochal. That is the ideal for the Keter Shel Torah along the lines of that Gemara in Brachot that we saw. However, there's a completely different understanding of this Mishnah, which is brought the school of Rashi, different perushim of Rashi and his students. That it's not an ideal of pat b'melech tochal, but rather afilu ein lecha ma le'echol. Right, the perush that is ascribed to Rashi says that it's that even if you are living a life of poverty, you still have the chiyuv to be osek and to be amel batorah. That is your responsibility, no matter what your physical circumstances are. One of his students, Rabbi Yaakov Reb Shimshon, says explains it even further. Even so, if you are, God forbid, so poor, so nevertheless you should continue and learn Torah. But imhu ashir polken sheyasa. So, but all the more so if you have a situation where you are blessed with wealth, so then all the more so you have a responsibility to devote yourself to Torah. So this is, again, here in the first instance, it was the Ramban versus, if you will, that understanding of the Gemara, and the Rambam in its parish to the Mishnah is explaining along the lines of that Gemara, taking it somewhat literally, an ideal to be separated from this world, whereas the school of Rashi understands it not at all as an ideal, that a person certainly should not shun the physical. Wealth is not something that we should be frowning upon, but that neither poverty nor wealth allows a person to free himself from the responsibility to be learning. With that in mind, I want to quickly focus on a Gemara. And in the next, I have about 15, 20 minutes left to this shiur. So what I'd like to do in that time is to look at a Gemara in Brachot with the explanation of Rav Kook, because Rav Kook understands this particular Gemara as being, in effect, a culture comp between competing views of the Amoraim with regard to the question that we have in hand. And the Gemara says the following, and here I've brought both the original as well as the English translation of both of the Gemara as well as Rav Kook's Perush. So here is the first Gemara. Rav Zera Chalash. Rav Zera once was ill. Al Lagabe Rav Evo. So Rabbi Avohu came to visit Rabbi Zera on his sickbed. Kabilale. And the Rabbi Avohu accepted upon himself. Imitapach katina charich shaki. So a very strange terminology. We'll see where it came from. Rabbi Zera had this nickname in, excuse me, had this nickname amongst his colleagues. The short, he was a short man, the little one with the scorched legs. If he it will become well, Avdina Yom Tov Rabbanan. I will make a holiday. I will make a feast. Yom Tov, in the terminology of the Gemara here, means, we see this elsewhere as well, refers to making a kiddush. They'll make a kiddush in Rabbi Zera's honor. And indeed, the Gemara continues, Itpach, and Rabbi Zera became well. Avad Sudata l'chula Rabbanan. Rabbi Avo kept his neder and made this kiddush, made this feast for the other chachamim, with Rabbi Zera being the guest of honor. He atal l'mishre. So when it came time to begin the meal, and to break the bread. Amar le Rabbi Zera, to make the motzi. So Rabbi Avohu, who was the host, so turned to Rabbi Zera and asked Rabbi Zera to make the motzi and to break the bread. Amar le lo savar lamar lahad Rabbi Yochanan Amar bal habayit botzea. So Rabbi Zera refused and said, "Don't you know the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, who says that it is upon the bal habayit to break bread? It's something that we do in all of our homes, that generally speaking, it's the Baal Habayit. Some families, it's the Baalat Habayit, but it is the person who is the host who breaks the bread and makes the motzi for the guests. So you should do it." So Sharalahu. So indeed, Rabbi Avohu broke the bread. Kimata levruche. So when it came time to bench, so Rabbi Avo turned to Rabbi Zera and said to him, "Do me the favor, can you please lead the benching?" Amar le. So Rabbi Zera didn't want to lead the benching either. Lo savar lamar lahadar of Huna demin Bavel. Rabbi Zera, and we're going to come back to this in a moment, Rabbi Zera was originally from Bavel, and he had made Aliyah and became a student of Rabbi Yochanan. So here, Rabbi Zera turns to Rabbi Avo in Eretz Yisrael and turns to him and says, "One second, aren't you familiar with the Shita of Rav Huna from Bavel, who says the Amar Botzea Mivarech?" Not the way that we do. The Gemara is going to now conclude with our halacha that is accepted halacha. But Rabbi Zera here says the person who makes the motzi, he's the person who should also lead the Birkat Hamazon, and he didn't want to do it. The Iu, now the Gemara says, well, didn't Rabbi Avo know Rav Huna's opinion? The Iu kiman svirele. So who did Rabbi Avo hold like? So it says, Kiha da Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Avo actually followed the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, who said this in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Baal Habayit Botzea Va'areach Mivarech. It's the Baal Habayit who breaks the bread, and it's the Oreach who makes the who says the benching, who leads the benching. And the Gemara continues and says, why? Because the Baal Habayit knows how much food is available. He knows if he has a lot of chalot, and he knows how many guests he's going to have in the following. If it's a Friday night, he knows how many guests he's going to have on Shabbat. He knows what the courses are, whether they're bread heavy, bread intensive, they're not bread intensive. Does he have to cut small, big, etc.? The Orech doesn't know that kind of information. Very practical type of halacha. Whereas when it comes to benching, on the other hand, the Gemara says that it's the Orech, because the Orech has the responsibility to add to his benching a special bracha on behalf of the Baal Habayit. So that is the halacha, and that's where the Gemara ends with the text of the bracha that the Oreach says. Now, the before a little bit of a background to understand this. What's going on? Who was Rabbi Zera? I mentioned that Rabbi Zera was a person who had made Aliyah and had come to the to Tveria to the yeshiva of Rabbi Yochanan. There are several stories about him, but now this is the heart of the story. Those of you who've been learning Daf Yomi, so about 2 weeks ago, we learned this in Daf Yomi. Rabbi Zera, he salik la'ara di Yisrael. When he made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, Yativ meya ta'anita dilishtachach gemara bavlai mina. So Rabbi Zera was an old-time Zionist. What does an old-time Zionist do? He wants to forget Eretz. He wants to forget the Chutz La'aretz. He fasted 100 days in order to purge himself from the Torah of Bavel. Already knowing this Gemara, so we should be thinking as to why did Rabbi Zera, if that was the case, quote Rav Huna min Bavel as part of the story. That is something which is already going to be curious. But hold on to that thought. We come now, he's fasted 100 days consecutively in order to free himself of the Torah. Presumably, he ate at night. Then the Gemara says, Yotiv Meya Acharinata. He fasted another 100 days. Delo Lishko Rebbe Lazara. So in order that Rebbe Lazar, who was, this is after Reish Lakish has passed away, and Rebbe Lazar is we'll call him the Skan Rosh Yeshiva of Rebbe Yochanan, and Rebbe Zera, and he's involved in the technical side of things. Rabbi Zera wants Rebbe Lazar to stay that way because Rebbe Zera does not want to be, he's number 3. He doesn't, Reish Lakish was number 1, Rabbi Lazar was number 2, Rabbi Zera is number 3. If anything happens to Rabbi Lazar, so Rabbi Zera is going to have to take over the role of the Skan Rosh Yeshiva, the Menahel, whatever you want to call it. He's going to have to be involved in the technical running of the yeshiva, and he doesn't want any of it. So he fasts another 100 days in order to protect Rabbi Zera, or Rabbi Lazar, excuse me. The Yativ Be'achrina, we're now up to he's there in his first year of Aliyah, so he's now fasting 300 days. What was the last 100? So here was in order that he the lo nishlot be'nura de Gehenom, that the fires of Gehenom should not impact upon him. Now, how do you know if the fires of Gehenom if you're fireproof? There's only one way to reach Gehenom, in period, and you're not coming back, at least not so fast. So what do you do? So this is what he would do. Shagar tanura salik v'yatid begaveh. So he would fire up an oven and get into the oven and sit in it. Because the Gemara says this is what's his rationale. If the fire of the oven didn't impact on him, he has a fighting chance with the fires of Gehenna. But if the fire of an earthly oven is going to burn him, so then he has more work to do to protect himself from Gehenna. That was his rationale. Now, you don't fit into an oven, even their ovens were a little bit larger than our ovens, but you don't fit into an oven if you're too big a person. He was the katina, right? Getting back to that nickname of his. He was the small guy who could fit into the oven, and yet what happened was it worked. Lo shalta beinura. The fire didn't bother him. However, Yom Achad Yavu Be'Rabbanon Eina. The Chachamim saw him doing this, and they didn't like it. They thought that this was a lack of, perhaps was somewhat of arrogance on his part, and they looked at him askew. And the Gemara says, Ichruch Shake. The Karile Katan Charich Shake. So his legs were scorched, and he, from that point on, he got that nickname that of the little rabbi with the scorched legs. That is the background story. So now Rav Kook, promised you to take a look at Rav Kook's understanding of the first story. So he says you have to read that first story with Rabbi Zera on his sickbed and being and getting and recovering from his illness, and Rabbi Avo making the kiddush. All of that you have to understand it through the prism of that first story. Because here, in effect, you have a machloket between Rabbi Zera and Rabbi Avohu about their entire way of understanding what this world is in relationship to Torah. Let me just make the screen a little bit bigger. Midato shel Midato shel Rabbi Zera hayta ha'anava b'tachlita. So the Rav Kook explains that Rabbi Zera was humility incarnate. The translation of the Rav Kook, the translation of the Gemara beforehand was not mine, but the translation, I think I took it from the Sino, but the translation of the Rav Kook, I take any responsibility for any mistakes. על כן החזיק עצמו כאילו הוא רחוק מהשלמות הראויה בעבודת השם מידת טהרה. So Rabbi Zera, why was he fasting all of those fasts? Because he felt that he was unworthy. And in order to become more worthy, he decided to become unworldly and chose the route of self-affliction, and that is the Gemara in Bracha in Bava Metzia that we just read. Shahaguf omnam hu be'erech regel al nefesh ha'eloki. So we should be looking at the body as a whole as being symbolic of the leg. What the leg is to the body, that is what the body is to the soul. You need your legs to get around, but they are not vital organs. They are important organs. They help us in terms of our being able in our mobility. Similarly, our bodies allow our souls to exist in this world, but they're not vital to the soul. So therefore, im yirbeh adam l'sagfo tiyah nefesh mechuseret ma'amada hanachon. So if the body suffers too much, so then the soul will lose its balance, and so if you will, his fasting is the equivalent of his sitting in an oven, and the sign for that was that his legs, which are, again, the legs to the body are the same as the body to the soul. So he afflicted his body, and that was something which he had gone too far with. And so therefore his legs were impacted as well. Now, that is the original story. But now we come to the second story. Years later, months later, unclear. Rabbi Zera has taken ill. And now Rabbi Abba suspects, Ulai alta machshava belev Rabbi Abba. So perhaps, we don't know for sure, but Rabbi Abba it's reasonable for him to be suspicious that the whole reason he shoresh cholio ka'et ba gam ken ma'adrachato harishona b'harchik adnei haguf yoter midai. Whereas again, Rabbi Abba thinks Rabbi Zera is up to his old tricks. Why is Rabbi Zera back in bed? Because he is, again, engaged in self-affliction, and now he's fallen ill, and that's why Rabbi Abba wants to make sure that other people do not follow this route. And the way that he does it is by saying that if Rabbi Zera should become well again, so then he's going to do the anti-Zera. The anti-Zera is to make a kiddush. The anti-Zera is to make a sudat mitzvah, a yom tova l'Rabbanan. Or if Rabbi Zera is going too far in the approach, what we showed earlier, the approach of the Rambam, the approach of the Gemara, to be looking at this world as being an impediment to spirituality. Rabbi Abba is going to come and say, no, this world, the way that we've been created, is actually a means and a way to achieve and to celebrate spirituality. We are supposed to embrace our physicality and use it in the as a means of approaching the Ribono Shel Olam, not to shun it. That's why that's why Rabbi Abba said, I'm going to make this feast for everyone. And the Gemara continues with a I was told I have up to 45 minutes. No, half an hour? Okay. Well, well, okay. So I'm told that I have to cut it short. So I'm going to just reach the end of the Gemara. Basically, this machloket between Rabbi Abba and Rabbi Zera comes down to the question of benching, because what is being said? Rabbi Zera understands that he is now being placed in this circumstance, but he is not accepting Rabbi Abba's approach. He's saying, listen, I am a guest at this particular feast. I am not the Baal HaSu'udah. You are the Baal HaSu'udah. I recognize your approach. I still disagree with your approach. But you are the Baal HaSu'udah, so therefore you have to break the bread. And here, Rabbi Zera goes one step further, and he breaks with his own practice. Normally speaking, Rabbi Zera would have embraced Rabbi Yochanan and have left Rav Huna of Bavel behind. But here he says, no, I'm going to take Rav Huna's opinion, because I am in no means going, in no way, in no fashion, going to accept this approach upon myself. We, lahalacha, have this idea. What do we do, lahalacha? We end up having the oreach leading the benching. He's the one who makes the bracha. In effect, we're telling Rabbi Zera that under these circumstances, even though you don't accept this approach, you still need to give a blessing to Rabbi Abba, who has that approach. The Gemara, in effect, is not coming to a conclusion in our question. Should we be embracing physicality? Should we be heading towards the more ascetic approach of Rabbi Zera, of the Rambam, of the Gemara in Brachot? It's an open question. Perhaps for Yechidei Skula, for the Rabbi Zeras amongst us, for the Rambams amongst us, for those who are able to accept the Ketret Shel Torah, that which we are now about to be going for during this Chag of Shavuot, the Yechidei Skula perhaps should look for the ascetic approach. The rest of us, the Atzilei, Bnei Yisrael, perhaps for us, the approach of Rabbi Abba is the one to embrace that what we started with, the idea of Vayechazu et Elokim, and quite literally Vayichlu Vayishtu. Yiratzon, this Shavuot, we should be able to accept the Torah, and whether we are leaning more to the ascetics or more to embracing the physicality in the service of the Ribono Shel Olam, that our Matan Torah should be one of Vayechazu et Elokim, one of Torah Ata Amel. Chag Sameach. Thank you for joining us as we continue our goal, Matan Torah for Shavuot, but Matan Torah in Eretz Tzvi throughout the year.